Great. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest DataBarracks webinar on how to write an effective cyber incident response plan. We've just hit 11, so whilst I'm doing introductions, I'm sure the numbers will start to bound up. It's great that we've had so many sign up for this today. It's a fantastic response. This is obviously a very popular subject. So without further ado, I shall dive on and into the subject matter. Now, by way of introduction then, and how today's going to work, the next 30 minutes or so is going to work. My name's Chris Butler. I am the Resilience Director here at DataBarracks. And for the next 30 minutes or so, I promise hopefully no longer than that, I will run through the webinar content. And then after that, we'll have about 10 minutes or so for questions. And we have had some pre-submitted questions, which is lovely. Not ones that we made up, I promise. They have actually come in for real. But do please, if you've got any other questions, type them in to the Q&A box on the screen as we go through. And James, who's helping today, will collate those and we'll answer those at the end as well while we're doing so. We will, of course, make everything available for you throughout today and send that out to all those who've registered to attend this session. And a slide at the end will contain all of that, the resources that we've got to share with you as well today. So that's the introduction agenda. Numbers are creeping up fantastically, which is great news. So I'm now going to dive straight in. I'm going to turn my webcam off for the presentation so you don't have to look at me or the background of my house. So what we're here to talk about then is how to build and create a cyber incident response plan. But why do we need one of these in the first place? And that's, a very important question. And there's really two answers to that. And the first is the reason why you might have any form of incident response plan, and that's because it sets you a consistent standard for how you deal with any form of issue. And if you've got a pre-prepared response, and here's one that we're going to dive into, so don't worry about the size of it just now, we're going to dive into today. If you've got this that you've put some thought into ahead of time, it means that you can react more quickly and puts you on the front foot straight away when you're dealing with any form of disruption. And you certainly don't want to be playing catch up within a cyber attack. Cyber incidents in particular need you to be really fast and decisive to prevent the spread and to limit the business impact of the attack. The quicker that you can respond and start to respond, the quicker that you can recover your business. And at the end of the day, that's what's really most important, is that you can get your business back up and running. If you think about it this way, if you had a bin fire in your paper bin in the corner of the office, put that out quickly, your office is fine. If you leave that to burn too long, then you risk losing the whole office burning down. So there's a big difference in how quickly you can recover your business, and that's what's ultimately important. So some other points to consider when thinking about why we need a plan. This isn't a plan that stands in isolation. It's got to be part of an overall response, and it needs to be aligned with the other plans in your business. For example, your crisis management plan and your business continuity plan. A plan that provides you some useful guidance is that it's not a detailed tick box checklist for use in every single set of circumstances. You need to be able to make management decisions while dealing with the incident as well. And of course, if you've got a plan, you've got to be able to know how it works. So practice it in an exercise and in tests, and make sure the people who know the plan are also familiar with how it actually works. So what really is the other reason why you need to have a plan? It's because cyber incidents are special in their own right. Responding to a cyber incident compared to other technical issues or even a business continuity issue is different because you've got this thing called the potential for a data breach. There are many more considerations that you've got to work through when dealing with this. You may have been forced out of your systems, for example, and you don't know how much data may have been compromised. And there are three characteristics then that cyber incidents tend to have. And the first one is this, is that they can take you completely offline or force you down this route. And it could be because you've got malware spreading on your network, or it could be because the hacker has managed to get in and shut you out completely. And the second then is this potential for data breach. And sometimes people use the phrase data loss. The data loss as a term is quite ambiguous because there are two kinds of data loss. For example, if you delete a file and you can't retrieve it, you've lost that data. You may also have lost an old tape or an old backup file. But the data's lost, but nobody else has it, and that's an important consideration. You wouldn't use your cyber incident response plan in that case. You'd hopefully just find the file for backup and restore it that way. But then the other kind of data loss is a data breach, and that's where another party who shouldn't be in there has got access, or indeed has had access to that data. Whether you still got access or not is kind of irrelevant. If the hacker's taken a copy, then the data is gone. You may also find that your data has been encrypted or deleted, just to compound the issue. And then the third issue that we're dealing with is the regulatory impact. And with breaches, the issues that you may be fined by the regulator, the ICO, or others, but then you've got to notify your customers. You've got the consequent loss of confidence in the business, the bad publicity that goes with that, loss of goodwill, brand damage, and so on. These longer-term impacts can stack up and and have a severe impact in their own right. So cyber incidents are, it goes without saying, very serious. They are increasingly common. There's definitely a bit of an arms race trying to keep up. And we're not going to go into AI today, but there's an example of where this arms race in cyber is growing. To give you a sense of the sort of scale of the change, every year we in DataBarracks carry out research on backups, disaster recovery, and cybersecurity. We've been asking about the causes of data loss for well over 10 years now. And for a long time, we didn't see a lot of change between the key causes of data loss. For many years, it's just down to hardware failure or human error. But they might vary a percentage point or two, but no more than that each year. Cyber attacks, however, are on a massively steep trajectory, and this won't come as any surprise to anyone listening. In 2008, only 2% of businesses reported it as a cause of data loss. In 2019, that figure went up to 17%, and you can see on the screen here how the figures have changed and the massive increase over the last 4 years. So in 2020, 23%, 26% in 2021, 38% in 2022, and in the most recent one, that shot up to 52% last year, and there's a link to this survey at the end of the presentation in the resources slide. Another interesting fact from the same survey, the Data Health Check, is that for the first time, cyber incidents are the #1 cause of IT downtime. Really, if you think about it historically, IT was unreliable for quite a long time now, and much more unreliable than it is now. And while cyber incidents have been the cause of data loss for a long time, this is the first year we've seen that cyber has been the leading cause of both data loss and IT downtime. So what does this really mean? Well, this means the impacts are much broader, much greater, much deeper, and you've got to be able to account for these aspects in multiple different ways within your plan documentation. So how then do you create and manage your plan? There's a number of frameworks that exist that are accepted as best practice for cyber incident response. One of the main ones is NIST, which is across from the USA. We've got guidance similarly from our own National Cybersecurity Centre. There's things like the standards, ISO 27001, there's the SANS, there's a number of different frameworks, but all these frameworks do have some certain commonality around the following stages. The first stage is around preparation. Then you move into detection and analysis, or identification as it's sometimes called. Third stage is then around containing, eradicating and recovering from the attack. Then the fourth stage is the after incident or post-incident analysis and lessons learned phase. So we've broken down our plan framework into these following 4 stages. We've called this identify, isolate and contain, rectify and communicate. This is a plan document. Once you've created the plan, you've got to be able to review it, make sure it works, and test it in exercises and, of course, post-incident. And then your overall approach is around preparing the organization to prevent these major business impacts, which is all part then of managing the plan. So you've got these 2 halves, create the plan and manage the plan. So what's the preparation that we need to then do to start off the plan? Well, you start with the threats that we want to plan for. What are the sort of things you have to identify, isolate and contain? This isn't exhaustive, but these are some of the key ones, and this has evolved over the years. You do need in your plan documents to have some guidance to cover the most likely or the worst case scenarios. You can't have an individual plan, and you shouldn't try to have an individual plan for each of these areas. But guidance for the response teams on ransomware, as one example, is obviously very useful. For example, what's your policy on paying a ransom demand if it comes in? And if you haven't had this conversation in your organizations, you should definitely be having that at C-suite level. Guidance on on an internal malicious user would also be helpful. However, you wouldn't need a plan to deal with spam, on the other hand, or industrial espionage. So you've got to break down and categorize and prioritize the threats that you see in your business. This will determine how you respond. And this will also include which incidents need crisis management team involvement. So when you're prioritizing actions, you've got to consider things from 3 different aspects. And there's guidance on how to deal with these aspects in things like NIST's Computer Security Incident Handling Guide, which is an excellent reference. Think about it from the functional point of view. So how does this functionally impact your business? Think about the information impact of the incident, what's the confidentiality, integrity, and availability aspects, and then about recoverability, how easy is it to recover from the incident? So combining the functional impact to the organization's systems and the impact to the organization's information then gives you the ability to categorize the business impact of the incident. And that's really important. And it comes back to the point I made earlier about not treating this in stovepipes. This has to be taken on a broader front. So an example there is if you had a DDoS attack on a web server, that might reduce the functionality of your public-facing website. That isn't, in the grand scheme of things, as significant as, for example, someone who's got unauthorized access into an application server, which could lead to sensitive or personal data being extracted and the consequent lasting reputational damage. So you also need to factor in your responses should the breach vector come from one of the many third-party service providers out there. And if you go back to even the SolarWinds attack, which was a very, very technically advanced third-party software supply chain attack, we've seen an increasing number of attacks that come in through the supply chain. And there were several last year that you can refer to, one of which I'll we'll refer to later on. But you'll need to have a plan, therefore, that deals with dealing with the cyber incident when you may not be principally at fault, but your data have been compromised. Just by way of brief diversion, given all these threats, what sort of security tools and services are there to defend against them? And today's not about this, but it's worth highlighting some of them. We are moving on next to the actual plan writing stage, I do promise. But the plan comes into play when something has got round or got through some of these security defenses. And you may have some or all of these in place already. And this is an area of constant evolution. Managed security services are widely available. Companies can outsource some or all of the responsibilities to partners. And there's a great deal to be said for having an expert third party monitoring your network traffic, your firewalls, your logs, and so on. And the purpose that they serve is to raise the alarm when something off normal happens. As long as they can quickly raise the alarm, and as long as they can also recognize false positives, then that's what they're there for. They're helping you to cut down the noise and get into where the actual breach is. So the link into the plan then is this: when this breach of one of these systems happens, how quickly can you activate your response teams and procedures? And the final point is, the purpose of the plan is to help you when the inevitable breach happens. There's all these tools and services are great, but you have to start with the assumption that a breach will happen at some point and prepare accordingly for it. So you do have to map out your process. The process can be unique for you. You can take this flow chart from us and modify it. As I say, it's in the resources, but you need to include in your plan relevant information about how the process works, but remember to keep it short, action-orientated, and readable. It's got to be practically useful in the event of the disruption. And one important aspect, actually, that you've got to include in your plan is to encourage reporting and escalation, even if it's precautionary. You should make it clear to staff in your early part of the plan that early action is better than leaving it too late when way more damage may have been done by the cyber attack. Remember, the quicker you can start that effective response, the sooner you'll be able to start the recovery process. I've made that point a couple of times. So let's now go through this in a little bit more detail. So the first stage then is the notification and verification stage. This tends to come from one of 2 sources: either internally, a user manually notifies you, for example, I've clicked on something I shouldn't have done, or you could get an automated alert from some form of monitoring product. If you've got a managed SOC service, then that could be coming in from a third party that you've paid to provide this service for you. Nonetheless, the notification is there, and hopefully you'll get an indication of any immediate actions that may have happened. You've got to log it and decide if this is an incident that has to be escalated. And again, you're then starting to go through this triage of what are the business impacts on the potential services affected. Does this have the potential to look like it might disrupt all operations, or is it just localized? And depending on how your infrastructure is set up, it could spread, malware could spread pretty quickly. And just refer you back to the NotPetya attack in 2017 and the attack on the shipping giant Maersk. Many of you will know this, but they lost 45,000 endpoints and 4,000 servers to that attack. And they managed to rebuild from a single server that had been powered down when the malware was launched. So it can be pretty extensive. So you're starting with those initial notifications, whether manual or automatic. They need to be investigated, and you need to cut through the noise that might be created to weed through the false positives and get to the sort of the heart of the issue. And it is a bit of a challenge, let's be honest, to balance this monitoring alerting without overwhelming the teams, because if you have too many alerts, people do become complacent, but you might miss the critical signal. Anyway, point made. That's the problem, identified, verified, logged, and categorized it. And it's important that you've got this logged, and the main reason for doing that is that clearly if you've got a data breach, data protection laws apply, and therefore, according to GDPR, you've got to report personal data breaches within 72 hours of becoming aware of the breach. So the clock has started. So we're going to cover, before we move on to external notifications in a little while, we just need to also think about the internal notification bit. Who do you need to tell immediately about this particular attack? That needs to be in your plan as well. And that should include an escalation path up to the crisis team. So we're going to move on to the next stage, isolating and containing. It may not be a simple step. In the case of a hacker with access to your network, you might be able to find them or the intrusion point, but you maybe don't know exactly how far they've got across all of your systems. You can start to reset passwords and deactivate suspect accounts, but it may well be that they've got onto the system some other way and you haven't quite found there yet. But as I've also mentioned, third-party vulnerability exploitation has been a successful route in for many hackers. So how, if you don't have control of that particular entry point because it's come through a software update from a third party, how do you then isolate and contain the breach? But you've got to work out how you do that in your plan pretty quickly, because if you're, as I said earlier on the last slide, the clock is running. You've got to make progress pretty quickly. So this stage is where you do need the technical support in order to be able to isolate and contain. And this is where you're highly likely to be bringing in teams from digital forensics companies, often managed security service providers, or other technical expertise if that doesn't exist in-house. This is also where your insurance company might come into play, because if your policy covers it, the insurance might be bringing these teams in for you. Or you may have your own call-off contract with a managed cybersecurity service provider. Today's not the day to cover the many ways in which that can happen, but you need to reflect how that happens in your plan, including the important insurance aspect. And depending on how quickly you respond, this might take you a few hours to many days to start to isolate and contain that intrusion. But in doing this, you've also got to make a decision about how you want to isolate that incident. You can start locally, the red bullseye, and then extend outwards, or you can start widely and then bring systems back as you work towards the issue. The benefit of starting at the device level is that you don't affect the majority of the users or the business. Many people wouldn't even notice you're dealing with the issue at the time. The downside, of course, here is that if it is a widespread issue, it will take you a lot longer because you're chasing your tail. If you start, however, on the outside and effectively take down the whole network or cut off access to the internet, you will stop incidents more quickly, but it will have much broader business impact. And that's something you've got to really take into account. If you've got to take that really drastic action, who is it that's got the authority to cut off the entire business from the whole of the internet? That's a major consideration. And in your plan, you should have a decision-making flow that addresses that. For example, in 2019, there's a company called Norsk Hydro that I'm sure some of you will have heard about. They suffered a ransomware incident, and the cyber attack there took the majority of their systems offline for a large £35,000 aluminium smelting company. A lot of those systems that they took offline, they weren't infected, but the company chose to do so to prevent infection and spread. And that particular strain of ransomware needed individual recovery of desktop machines. So even if the restoration only took 10 minutes per machine, if there's 10,000 desktops, that's 1,500 man hours or 70 days of work to recover them all. So fast action does have an impact because it can save you time later on. But again, I reinforce the point, if you're the newbie in the office and you're working the night shift when the inevitable attack comes in, do you want to make that decision to take all those machines offline? Probably a tricky one, but you need to have that decision-making flow in the plan. And if you don't think that the attack will come in at the worst possible time, then I suggest you look at a few of the recent case studies. The Scottish Environment Protection Agency was hit on the 25th of December, and Travelex was hit on New Year's Eve. So that's exactly when they launched these attacks. So get that into your plan as well, because you might be having to make fast decisions before your cyber response teams can be brought in by insurance. So having the documented plan is what's critical. So we're now moving on to the rectification stage. And again, this is where you're going around the houses with your technical experts until you've managed to plug the hole. You close off, complete, and then you can move into the review and reporting afterwards. But what is eradication and recovery? What things have to be covered here? Well, if we look at sort of malware infections just generally as an example, you'll have to therefore be updating your antivirus software, which will mean going out to third party to getting that update, and you may have to share that update to your suppliers, vendors, or other business units to make sure that they've got that update. You'll obviously need to be patching any systems that could have been compromised and updating the drivers and the various software that could be implicated as well. And over the years, we've seen a number of services such as VPN and DNS servers being the route in. So there's pretty broad range where updates and patches have to be considered and applied in order to make the business more secure. Now, clearly, if you're a regular fan of penetration testing and vulnerability scans, you hopefully will be on top of this. But we all know, with the best will in the world, not everything can be updated all the time at the source. It takes a lot of effort. And you're still left actually with the tricky issue of when the route in is via a critical third party. What do you need to do to help them or to understand how they are cleaning up their environments? And of course, you've got to then consider the whole aspect of backups. And in many cases, you will need to recover systems to an earlier point in time. And reverting back to the version before the incident clearly requires you to understand when the intrusion happened. So you've got to have a good recovery plan that allows you to quickly identify when your last clean backup was. Now, we, of course, do this a lot. We've talked about this a lot in other webinars, so I'm not going to cover that just now, particularly on recovering from ransomware. But the short answer is to make sure you've got a decently high frequency of backups, so you do have one just before the infection. And of course, your other alternative is to have an approach that allows you to recover quickly through a disaster recovery service, for example, that manages to help you do full virtual machine recoveries. But the bottom line, really, to reinforce the point about good backups, is that given the likelihood that hackers will also target your backups, you will need isolated, air-gapped, immutable, and encrypted backups to recover from. So we've mentioned communications in many of our webinars. It's a real favorite for us, and anyone who's a crisis management professional knows how important it is, but it sometimes is overlooked, particularly at this sort of level. But it's sometimes better to have a poor incident that's communicated well, rather than the other way around, where you've got a less serious incident that you communicate really badly. You can make your own decision as to whether you agree with that or not. But there are a few different types of communications that you will need to have. You'll obviously need to notify your internal users. Then there's the customers or the victims of the breach, your insurance company, which I mentioned a couple of times, the likes of the police and action fraud for investigation reasons, given that you're likely to be the victim of a crime, the regulatory bodies, including the ICO for a data breach, and then the bête noire of all companies, the press and the wider public. Now, again, we've talked about communications in other webinars before, so do have a read of those, listen to that if you find it on our channels. But you do need to plan properly how you deliver the messages into all these different target audiences, taking into account that your primary method of communications may be affected. And as we saw from part of the earlier flowchart, some incidents may only need internal notifications, but if you are speaking more broadly than that, it's suddenly a very significant task, and it dictates that more people need to be involved with the right skills to be able to do that. And that really is one for the crisis team and not for the cyber incident response team. This is where the PR organizations and your media and communications teams come into play. Let's give you an example actually that runs through why effective communications are so important. You may not have heard of TOMRA, but this is why we've included. It's a recent example of excellent communications in a crisis. Really, it's the Scandinavians at it again, showing the rest of us what good really looks like. I mentioned Norsk Hydro. It seems like those guys over there know what to do when it comes to responding to a cyber attack. So this is a multinational from Norway, specializes in state-of-the-art sorting and grading technologies for recycling, mining, and food. Is perhaps best known for its reverse vending machines, if you're in that world. So in the early hours of Sunday, see the weekend, 16th of July last year, the company discovered a cyber attack had affected some of its IT infrastructure, and it immediately disconnected several of its systems to contain the breach. Most of its systems are designed to run offline for a limited time, and the company added further measures to keep operations up and running, whilst the cybersecurity team began to migrate services to the cloud and restore others, hiring a global cyber response team to assist them with the investigation and response. So rather than posting every piece of information at the early stages of crisis comms, it's best to pare it back. It is a difficult time, and you may not have a complete picture of the whole situation. Consider the critical needs of what you're addressing and share what's minimum to be effective. And this company, TOMRA, was transparent and concise from the get-go. So what they started to do was publish some updates, 8 in total, about the attack on its website, giving sort of a brief update around progress about what they've done. And then they followed this one up as well with an open letter from the CEO and the president that gave some more details about the attack. You know, its first post was around the fact of being targeted by an extensive cyber attack and sharing contact emails for any questions. So really getting ahead of the news, laying out the response, and inviting questions like this creates reassurance to the customer that you're in control of the situation and that you've got a plan. I wanted to share another example, the British Library attack of last year, from a different angle. I do like a good case study, and this one is relevant and interesting for different reasons. I'm sure most of you are aware of this one from last year as well. This one is designed to demonstrate how widely the impacts of a cyber attack can spread. As it happens, British Library didn't cover itself in glory with its communications, but I'm not going to go down that route again. So the reading rooms in the British Library have been much quieter since October last year, when the attack from a Russian gang happened. They managed to infiltrate and disable the catalogue and the computer systems, leading to a double extortion with data encrypted and exfiltrated. And there's one report that suggests that the remediation will drain up to 40% of the British Library's reserves. The attack saw staff data released, requiring many staff to renew passports. Operationally, it caused paralysis for the library, with no access to archives or to be able to order books and journals. Those affected, therefore, go beyond the person popping in to borrow a book to read. This affects students, academics, researchers, and authors, as this is an institution at the heart of British cultural life. And you're probably aware that it's required to keep a copy of every book and magazine ever published. So books and PhDs remain unfinished, and livelihoods are affected because authors earn a royalty whenever a book is borrowed from a library in the UK. So things are improving for British Library, but it does reinforce a different aspect of cyber incident response to make sure that you have considered the major impacts and to make sure that you have plans to deal with those as well. So 2 interesting examples, which I hope you can take something away from. And then the very final stage is make sure that once you've written your plan, you review it with those who are going to use it. And of course, you have to review the plan after any particular incident. We strongly recommend that you test the plan through practice, through awareness training and exercising. And then as you try the plan, you can then learn from it So you might be making changes to your preventative measures as a consequence of learning from an incident or an exercise, and you might actually improve your plan as well at the same time. And once you've made those changes, you should be communicating those changes internally and externally to, for example, your insurance company or to other critical partners who might want to know about the plan. What you're doing here then is making your organization significantly more secure through having a plan that you've practiced, that you've tested, that you've got confidence in, and that you're able to activate quickly in the event of that sadly inevitable cyber attack. So that's the end of the first part of what I wanted to say about running through how to create a cyber incident response plan. We do have, as I mentioned earlier, some resources available, and when you get the slides, these links will be there as well, but you can see some of the most important ones and a link to some of our webinars. We do have a number of webinars on our YouTube channel. We've got a number of resources on our website, so please do feel free to use those and come back to us if you've got any questions. Look us up or contact us via the website. What we're now going to do, having seamlessly hit 30 minutes for the presentation, is go into questions, and I will initially look through what we've got on the website. Sorry, on the website from the pre-submitted questions, and I'll come to ones that I can see have been added throughout the presentation. So the first question that I had was, how would you suggest implementing precautionary incident steps in a dynamic IT environment to enhance security measures? Well, I think there's a number of aspects to this. It'll come down to your risk appetite. It'll come down to your budget to implement sort of layered security measures, to create the ability to monitor all the aspects that needed monitoring, so networks, firewalls, web servers, storage, etc. So that's the having really effective monitoring tools and alerting tools is one part of it. But of course, it's then ensuring that that effective monitoring includes the ability to minimize those false positives. Another way that you can also do this is through having file anomaly detection. And in our world, in backups, for example, this is built into a lot of the services that are available. You can detect malware, and we've done this for some of our customers in the past, where we can detect the possibility of a malware attack through identifying changes in the incremental backup files. The file size of an encrypted file will be larger or different, and certainly the signature will be different to the normal file. So you might actually see a spike. Like I said, we've actually helped customers in the past detect cyber attacks through that particular aspect. As I say, this monitoring is incorporated into many security vendor platforms as well. So that's around precautionary incident steps. Somebody asked about the plans aligned to a framework. I hope I've covered that. There are a series of frameworks, and so the NIST and the cyber assessment framework from the National Cybersecurity Centre are two most relevant ones, I'd suggest, but there are plenty of others. The third question was, what are your recommendations for out-of-band communications in case you don't trust your network, or that you believe the bad actors are eavesdropping on your response plan in the case of ransomware, for example? So there are a wide range of third-party platforms that are available out there, provided as SaaS platforms or through ICT, communications providers, who can provide you with communications tools that aren't on your network. It's not practicable that hackers are going to get inside your mobile phones as well as inside your network, and therefore all the usual telephony-based applications are available. So all the secure ones like WhatsApp and Telegram and Signal, or you've got Slack and iMessage, all these apps that you can have, and you can set those up to work. You can set up groups for those as well. But of course, you've got the old-fashioned way, which is a telephone call cascade and mobile phones. They still have their place because they are your ultimate reversionary method if you really don't trust your network. But make sure, of course, that the communications plans that you've got are up to date and that you can get hold of people. But equally, technically, having a strong layered and segregated network with good controls also reduces the likelihood of the hackers getting into and spreading widely and laterally across your infrastructure. We did do a webinar on building a mass notification tool. Do have a review of that if that's of particular interest as well. And then the next question was, should your response plan include actions for other teams and third-party support, for example, insurers, ICT partners, etc.? Absolutely is the answer to that one. You're also refer to what I said earlier about your cyber incident response plan being integrated more widely into incident management plans across the business, your crisis comms team, and the crisis level plan in particular. Because response is one part of the equation. Your business continuity plan will keep the lights on in the business, and your recovery plans will also get the business back up on its feet, which ultimately is the goal. You should definitely include third-party suppliers, third parties and suppliers in your plans. And indeed, I'd encourage you strongly to include them in an exercise, starting with your most critical, your tier one suppliers. Hopefully you've got those mapped out. If you incorporate them into your plans, then you start to grow awareness and understanding of each other's roles in that disruption. And you should also include insurance in there as well, because especially if your insurance is your route to your digital forensics teams, you 100% have to incorporate that in your plan and lay out the expectations and how and who activates insurance and digital forensics. Sometimes you might find that those teams, if they're third parties, they come in externally, they might actually take over to some significant extent your own IT environment, and your own IT teams may find themselves somewhat sidelined. Understanding how that works is what's important. The next question then is, should an organization have different cyber plans for various different types of attack? For example, ransomware, malware, and DDoS. I think I sort of addressed some of that earlier on in the presentation, looking at the various different severity of attack. So I think my answer to that is you have a framework plan that gives you the command and control and incident management methodology, structure, decision-making guidance to allow you to respond to the attack, and then you add on to that specific guidance for various different types of attack according to your risk profile and your priorities. So I'd say ransomware definitely, malware definitely, things like DDoS you can have, that's perhaps slightly different. But you can have a plan for that. But like I suggested earlier, if you're being spammed, then you're not really going to have a bespoke plan for that. So again, it's prioritize your efforts and your resources to create the plans and the necessary response. And I'd also say that you should have certainly a ransomware runbook for the C-suite, as well as having a technical response plan as well. Another question, to what extent do you think some organizations aren't going public in data breaches for fear of the reputation damage? Well, I'm sure that's a very significant issue. Obviously we don't know what we don't know, but I've seen some statistics which suggest that 40 or 50 or even 60% of attacks aren't being made public, and we just don't hear about it, which means, well, how are they getting through them? They've either got really good backups and they're recovering quickly and it's not gone public, or more likely they've paid up, and they've paid up in part to keep it out of the public spotlight. So I do think this happens, and reputation damage will definitely be a significant part of the decision-making process for those companies. A number of questions then around, what's this? Next one is around cyber insurance. Is cyber insurance a good investment, as many never pay? This is a constantly evolving landscape, and we ran an event last year where we actually had somebody from the insurance sector at this breakfast briefing that we had. Fascinating conversation. Is it a good investment? Well, I think you're paying more for less cover, I think, is a generalization that's probably fairly true. But equally, the cyber insurance market is, on the other hand, also maturing as underwriters are getting to understand the risks better. But what is definitely the case is you can reduce the risks and reduce your premiums through having much better cyber security, cyber defenses, controls in place, and things like your isolated, immutable, off-network, air-gapped backups. All of the things that reduce the risk of them having to pay will reduce the premium. But again, if you'll be faced with the challenge of paying a lot of money for cybersecurity against paying a lot of money for cyber insurance. And we've also seen, the final point I'll make on insurance is we've seen that some companies will no longer pay the ransom demand. So you get what you pay for. Is a simple answer there. So at which point would you isolate your systems to prevent continued external access? I think that's a risk-based decision, and you have to involve the technical response there to understand the spread of it. If you think it's going to end up spreading widely, then you've got to make that decision quickly. I don't think there's not a point in time that you can point to that says those are the reasons, and therefore these are sort of, if you tick these 3 boxes, then you isolate from external access. That's a decision you've got to make pretty quickly, because the longer it takes to make that decision, then you're running the risk of much wider spread, greater contamination, and therefore a significantly more demanding effort to clean up and then recover the business as well. Final question then is, how does Datavarics help customers prepare incident plans? Yes, that is something that we can do. In fact, as I mentioned at the start, my role is Resilience Director. So I run the business resilience team of consultants. And one of the things that we do for our own customers, as well as for people who are looking for services in this vein, is we can help customers write the cyber incident response plan, but also a cyber recovery plan. So that's the before and after, if you like, or the immediate putting the fire out in the bin, as well as recovering the business. But we can also write incident management plans for your business continuity team and crisis management plans. So yes, we have the ability to help prepare plans, but also to run the exercises to test those plans as well. Oh, sorry, I missed another plan. What was the cause of the method for the British Library attack? I'm afraid I don't have that to hand. I think a quick Google search will sort that out. I will find out the answer, because I probably ought to know a bit more detail about that. There we go. I see numbers are still good, but 1 or 2 are dropping off. We've now got to the end of the questions, as far as I can see. I would like to thank you all for attending today. As I said at the start, we will all make everything available to you, to everyone who's registered, and those who have obviously grateful for those who've attended as well. If there's anything else you'd like to discuss with us, do please get in touch via the website, or if you're a customer, via your account manager, and we'd love to explore any of the issues that are covered today in more detail. So that remains for me to then close out this webinar. Thanks very much for all of you for attending, and we look forward to speaking with you again in the future. Goodbye.